Hello interwebs and welcome to my channel. So for today's video, I really want to just kind of gush about a specific scene from a movie that I just watched recently that really touched my heart and really just, I think, did a lot of the things that I've been really wanting movies to do, like big budget Hollywood, premiere action adventure type of movies to do when it comes to LGBTQ representation. And the movie I'm talking about specifically is The Old Guard, the Charlize Theron sort of superhero film that was available on Netflix that came out about 2 to 3 weeks ago. I only just watched it literally last night from when I filmed this video on the sort of suggestion of one of my Patreons in my Discord. So by the way, if you want to maybe influence some of the things that I watch or just talk to me about random stuff that you find interesting or cool, please check out my Patreon, join my Discord. It's a really fun community. We got a lot of cool people talking and just having interesting discussions like this over in there. And hi, Beta Artemis, thank you for sort of poking me to get a look at this movie because it was absolutely wonderful. Now, the movie as a whole, as I just stated, was a really wonderful film. I did find some of it to be a little bit, in terms of the action set pieces and stuff like that, I didn't find it to be anything spectacular. But really, what this movie was truly about wasn't the action, wasn't the sort of pharmaceutical, random whatever villain plot sort of thing going on in the film. It was really about this group of immortal characters, these characters of these sort of mercenaries who have lived for eons in history who cannot die. Sort of their ennui with being immortal and sort of living forever, but also finding meaning in relationships with each other and finding meaning in sort of the relationships that we create with ourselves and also the relationship that we create with others around us and how we treat communities and things like that. And I thought the interpersonal relationships and the sort of grander message that this movie had to say was absolutely fantastic in terms of its execution and how it was done. Sure, the action, it's there, it's fine. I didn't hate it, but I didn't think it knocked me out of the park, but that's really the meat of this thing. And you can see that in a lot of different ways. I think this movie just really did it super, super beautifully in its showcasing of diversity of its cast. A lot of the old guard characters are very diverse from very different backgrounds, which would make sense for a group of characters that are just sort of sprung up immortals throughout history and time. They would have come from all over the place and all over the world. And it really just works very well, but I like that that's something that Hollywood just generally sometimes forgets and makes it a group of all mostly white people and then one black guy. But no, this was a truly diverse group of people that you got to see here, and I really adored it. But I want to talk in particular how this movie does all that and does the sort of discussion of interpersonal relationships and how we treat each other and how we treat each other is important in one particular scene that really highlighted the LGBTQ community specifically. There is one scene in this movie that I'm going to play really briefly, or at least a snippet of it, right here for you.
I
told you. Shut up.
I need to know he's okay.
That's sweet. What is he, your boyfriend?
You're a child. An infant. Your mocking is thus infantile. He's not my boyfriend. This man is more to me than you can dream. He's the moon when I'm lost in darkness and warmth when I shiver in cold, and his kiss still thrills me even after a millennium. His heart overflows with a kindness of which this world is not worthy of. I love this man beyond measure and reason. He's not my boyfriend. He's all and he's more.
Incurable romantic.
Now, I really, really adored this scene for multiple reasons. First off, I want to start with how this scene began, which is that guard sort of kicking the guys that they've captured, these two immortals here, and saying oh, what is he, your boyfriend, when he shows concern for the other guy. Now, I really like that moment because it's not this sort of beat you on the head I hate gay people, they're awful. It's not overt hate, but it is something that a lot of masculinity that we've built up in our society. Again, I'm talking about toxic masculinity. Oh no, I know I've just gotten a billion dislikes for even mentioning that phrase already, but it really shows how that ethos works. Very few people that are, express this sort of toxic masculinity sort of thing are really expressly homophobic or, hate gay people, are expressly bigoted in that way, at least not today anymore. Most people, I would say, in the United States in particular, are not expressly homophobic. But they do have a lot of internalized homophobia, that you sort of expressed your masculinity by like putting down any sort of representation of men liking each other. It's like, no homo, man, no homo, homo, even when you're doing the most gayest of things. Like, I worked at a Boy Scout camp for several summers. The gayest things you've ever seen would happen at a Boy Scout camp. Like, not like, well, I mean, there were gay people that worked there. I won't out them or anything, but there were some gay people that worked there. But in terms of like just boys being together, we would get into some very homoerotic stuff, like PG-13 level, like homoerotic stuff. Not, again, I'm getting too far into this. You can kind of tell what I mean. Like, you give each other back massages and things like that. It's weird. It's gay. It's very homoerotic, not R-rated or anything, beyond the realms of what we should have been doing, but very like, homoerotic sort of things. But we would always sort of preface it by saying no homo, or sort of like acknowledging like, oh yeah, we're men. I mean, in my case, it was also masking something else going on. But for a lot of them, it was sort of that sort of like affirmation of masculinity by distancing yourself from homosexuality. And you see this in the scene by like, oh, these sort of guys laughing at like, oh, is he your boyfriend? But then we get this really beautiful moment of the character calling them children. And that's kind of true. That feeling, that mentality is very, 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 very childish. But I also like that there's this sort of layer on top of it of this guy has been around for at least centuries at this point. And so for him, everyone of any age is childish. And so it can kind of have this glossary thing of like, yes, it is a childish thing and it is calling it out childish, but I like that it has a little bit of a sort of protective layer on it of sort of like stepping back and having a more distanced look at our culture in general and how human culture in general can be very, very childish, even by adults and being perpetuated by adults. Even adult sort of things can be very, very childish in their execution. So I like that there was sort of like two layers that his sort of calling out of this toxic masculinity BS plays on there. It's sort of like a directly like, yeah, this guy is being childish and these men sort of laughing at that being childish. But then also this sort of like pseudo critique of culture in general, which sort of gets at that idea of the larger issue of toxic masculinity going on. But even further, he just takes this moment to truly just deliver this declaration of love for this man in a way that you don't really get to see in sort of queer representation. A lot of queer representation in TV and movies today, really you feel the weight of society on queer people a lot of the time. That when queer people get to be together in films and TVs and movies, they kind of are a little bit more reticent to show it. Understandably so. Society sometimes really hates on any sort of expression of queer love in public. Sort of public displays of affection for queer people are often looked down upon and belittled. But this character, because he's immortal, literally doesn't have that fear. And it pushes back against, again, this trope of bury your gays. The bury your gays trope is this trope where a lot of like any queer romance in film, at least one or sometimes both of these sort of the queer couple will end up dead by the end because you kind of can't have queer people being happy in the end. It came out of the Hollywood Code from eons ago, where it expressly stated that if you had a queer person, they could not be happy in the end. They had to be punished, quote unquote, for their queerdom. But that sort of trope, even after the Hollywood Code went away, just sort of carried on in film and in film language and in film scripts, and just became a trope of media, even though no one was expressly saying you had to do this. And so I like that this film really just directly pushes back against it, because these characters are characters that get killed but then come back and are able to subvert it, and in so doing are able to push past this sort of fear of the declarations of love and just get to state unequivocally in this really beautiful, eloquent speech saying why he loves this man and why this man is important to him. So I just really wanted to point that out in this movie. The whole movie is great, and I think it's well worth watching, but that scene in particular just truly, I thought, spoke wonders on so many different levels, just really targeting many, many, many different aspects of society and how queer representation has often worked in films, and kind of subverting it in very interesting ways, even in just a small 1-2 minute scene in that movie. So I applaud the old guard for that scene, and I definitely recommend that you watch the entirety of the movie if you're sort of looking for something that is definitely a superhero movie, definitely in that genre, definitely feels like a sort of Marvel-esque kind of film, but in many ways also does a little bit more, says a little bit more than sometimes those movies kind of do. So and also Charlize Theron is always fantastic. Really, she's like the hottest, most amazing, most awesome person to ever act. I have a thing for Charlize Theron on many levels. So yeah, just check out The Old Guard. I really recommend it. But what did you think of that scene? What did you think of that movie? Let me know in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe for more discussions like this on LGBTQ topics and geek culture, things like that. Also, I have a Patreon. You can help me out there. I have some podcasts called Star Trek Behind the Lines and What the Frel. You can check those out. I do a bunch of stuff. I have a Twitch thing. Yeah, there's a lot of things. All the links are down in the doobly-doo. Please support me on Patreon if you can. But regardless of if you subscribe, comment, all that other stuff, I just hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all my patrons who support me over on Patreon. And an extra special thanks to my commander level and above patrons, Ashley Allen Bocello, Miranda Janelle, Eli Berg-Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Randy Thompson, Mouse Pounder, Jemshin, Susan Banks, Wellington Marcus, Lorena Mesa, Alexander Miller, John Steele, William Stewart, Michael Beam, Gavin Robinson, Aaron Brown, Christy Marie Johnson, Jason Knott, Maggie Evans, Maeve, Subraxis, Zach Cody, Dante St. James, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Auntie Cat 808, Patrick Shannon, Din Hagney, Mark the Edge, Bree Beecher, Polly Mina, and Gretchen Badger. Thank you to all of you. I couldn't do this without you, so thank you so much for your support.